scientific illustrator and has gone on to become a very talented graphic designer and most recently an animator. She's won a variety of prizes and other kinds of recognition for the graphic design work that she's been doing for the RCSB Protein Data Bank. Her work also figured prominently in the documentary entitled Target Zero, which featured the efforts that are underway in various parts of the United States to eliminate HIV transmission through prophylactic treatment. So that an important public service in addition to the many activities that she's been doing for the PDB. Of late, Maria's been extremely busy getting us ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the PDB, as you can see with the logo that's now behind her head. If you duck to your right for a moment, the full logo comes into view. Thank you, and no need to duck anymore. I think much of the visual appeal of the structural studies that are featured in the PDB comes from Maria's very creative work. I should also say that this is not the first time that Maria and David Goodsell have been partnering on various activities. They are key members of the education and outreach team, along with Shuchi Dutta, who you've met, and my deputy director, Christine Zardecki. So Maria, the floor is yours. Please, please help these 21 budding science communicators become even more effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for this generous introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. And go into presentation mode. So today I'm going to talk about my personal trajectory. Stephen actually mentioned, but I would like to talk about it in a context of the useful tools that I learned along the way. And if you think about this career, this could be useful for you as well. And then I'm going to talk about good practices in visual communication. So I'm going to talk about how to communicate with color and some tools that are useful for creating effective graphic designs. So those will be Gestalt Laws and design principles. So as Stephen mentioned, I started at the PDB almost 10 years ago. At first, my major skills were graphic design and illustration. So the useful tools, the things, if you think about this type of career, one of the tools that is very important is Photoshop. Photoshop, I guess everybody knows what it is, but it's basically a software for manipulating images. A free alternative is GIMP. Illustrator is another important tool that you should probably know. It's for creating line art, vector-based images. And you can also use free alternatives such as GIMP or Inkscape. And I used to know layout software, and that was back then Quark Express. I'm using InDesign now. So in terms of graphic design and illustration, general graphic design and general illustrations, those are the tools that are extremely important. As I continued at the PDB, so actually here on the top, you see that this was one of my first projects when I started in 2011. And I created the layout and I wrote some of the text. However, all the images, all the molecular images were given to me. Somebody else created them. So by 2012, beginning of 2012, I decided this is not sustainable, that I have to always ask somebody to create the images for me, especially that a lot of the layouts that I would create required some sort of molecular visualization. So the first thing that I actually learned was molecular viewer. And my molecular viewer of choice is UCSF Chimera. And in molecular visualization, it's extremely important to know the ins and outs of how to edit protein structures for illustration. And this is not only to create illustrations out of the molecular viewer, but later on, as I was learning additional software packages, it was very important to have those models edited and ready to be animated in different software. So I recommend you CSF Chimera, but if you are a command line type of person, Pymo is also great. So sometime between 2012 and 2013, I got to know the work of Drew Berry. Drew Berry is an animator, molecular animator, who is very, very famous. And he was one of the first people who started using the commercial software, the mainstream software that is used by big 3D animation studios like Pixar. And he used this software to animate 3D scenes of scientific processes. So I think this is I think this has something has to do with duplicating the DNA. I don't remember for sure what exactly this image shows. So anyway, when I saw his videos, I thought, well, this is the way biology should be taught. Biology is three-dimensional and dynamic, and this is exactly what these videos are. So around 2000, somewhere between 2012 and 2013, I started learning Autodesk Maya. So it's a software for 3D animation. A free alternative is Blender. And around 2013, I made my first project in 3D that was a little video called What is a Protein? And that it was based on a flyer that David created with, I think, his intern, as far as I remember. So it is actually very simple. And when we posted it on YouTube, we had actually really fantastic feedback with this video. So that sort of gave me the idea we really should actually continue doing more animating projects, because actually this is what our audience really found useful, and they learned a lot from them. So along with Autodesk Maya, I also learned After Effects. So the way the 3D software works, you actually animate and then you render the material and you get a series of images. So then you need another software package to put all these images, all these series of images together to make a video. So my software of choice is After Effects. It's a really great package. I actually don't know a free alternative that is as good as that. So you might have to research that on your own. But if you can pay, just go for After Effects. It's a great software. So Autodesk Maya has a very, very steep learning curve. I still feel like I know nothing, even though I've been using it for so many years. It's really vast. So once I learned the basics of the animation, I was exploring various shaders. So how to make the surface look like, the colors and the patterns on things, and different rendering techniques. So this is one of the examples of my image that I created in 2015. And actually, this image won an award, which is actually, I have to say, it was extremely encouraging. So once you get this encouraging feedback, you keep going. So between 2015 and 2016, the plugin Molecular Maya became available. And before 2015, before Molecular Maya, getting the PDB structures into Autodesk Maya was extremely complicated. You had to write scripts and go through a couple of different software packages to get those models, the 3D models, into the software. After Molecular Maya, you could open PDB files directly in the software. And in the software, directly in Autodesk Maya, you can change the representation. And also it has functionality when you can put in the morph files, the states of the motion. Like for example, in this reverse transcriptase animation, you see that the enzyme itself is moving each time it accepts a base or it's changing its shapes, it accepts a drag. And that animation, based on the data, based on the scientific data, you can combine with the handmade animation. So basically the enzyme is all scientific data, how it moves, and the way the bases and the DNA moves, this is all made by hand. So this is actually really, this became really, really wonderful that you could actually make this two types of animation, combine them together, thanks to Molecular Maya. So as I started making more and more videos, it became clear to me that if you introduce a molecular topic to users, you are traversing huge scale levels. So you go from organism to cells, to proteins, to atoms. Like for example, here in this video, penicillin and antibiotic resistance. If you explain a topic, you see the bacteria bursting, and then you're going to talk about the penicillin binding protein and how the antibiotics bind. You see that you're traversing huge, huge scales. Now, creating 3D models, 3D animation is extremely time consuming and complicated. So at some point, we decided that everything that is not our specialty, everything is not that focuses on the function of protein, detailed view of protein, I was going to make with 2D animation. And that was really, really good in terms of speeding up the process. And the software that I recommend for that is After Effects. So in After Effects, you can edit your videos together, and it's also absolutely fantastic for 2D animation, for motion graphics and things like that. Okay, as I kept going, also Autodesk Maya kept changing. Like for example, before 2018, I believe, there was no MASH plugin. So anything that required repetitions like membranes and things like that had to be programmed, had to have some sort of scripts. Nowadays, there is MASH plugins. So for example, in this excerpt from the video, Fighting Coronavirus with Soap, this was created with Maya MASH. So you import the proteins into the Autodesk Maya and creates this sphere. And then the software distributes the protein along the sphere and it adds the motion to that. So for example, here you see that also the same way, I use the same technique to create the membranes. So if you have a lot of repeating elements, like the atoms here and the membrane and the proteins, all the repetitions are done with MASH. So that speeds up the process by a lot. So my message from this is always look into new versions of the software, because software is getting better and better, and it can always make your work easier and faster. So now my current focus when it comes to obtaining new skills is learning JavaScript and CSS. I also started working part-time as a web developer within the PDB. But my main interest in JavaScript and CSS is because I think what we're gonna see in the future, there will be a lot of the data-driven visualizations that are rendered in the real time to the screen. And I think this is the future of scientific visualization. I mean, we see a lot of new things now, but I think this is going to go in this direction more and more. So I have nothing to show for in terms of this kind of skill, but I hope in the future there will be something. If you would like to learn more about, if you would like to see the full videos that we created, with the PDB 101, you can go on the website pdb101.rcsb.org, and you can go to the top menu, use the Learn link, and then videos, and you can watch the full-length videos. So this is all, those are the tools that I'm using for my work. I highly recommend those tools. I'm actually have been happy with these tools. If you think about this type of career, this will be the standard package that you probably need to know. Now, I don't know why I cannot. Okay, so finishing these sections, I can give you a little professional advice. Those were the things that worked for me over the years. So never stop developing your skill stack. So on my example, if I stuck to my initial set of skills, just Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, I practically would be useless in today's world. Things have changed over the last 10 years so much that you cannot stick to the one set of skills and hope that you will be able to find employment and create something interesting for people with the same set of skills. If you learn something, be patient, because sometimes it's really hard in the beginning. Like with Autodesk Maya, I struggled really hard in the beginning. It was very hard to sort of internalize those concepts. So sometimes it's very hard to climb the beginning of the curve because it's steep, but then it's gonna get better. And like I gave you the example with Mesh, keep up with the technology. It makes your life easier, the new things. And always, always, when you create a visualization, think of your audience. So make sure that they understand what they look at, put yourself in their shoes, think of the way you were before you knew the content, the topic. Think what you understood, and then take it from there and then create the visualization. And also another thing that is actually segueing into my second part of my presentation, learn how to use the useful tools. So you might not be a full-time illustrator, but you might have to, as part of your job, create visual pieces for your articles, for your presentations. And I see this all the time. People say, well, I have no skills in graphic design. I don't know how to use colors. I just don't care. It has to be ugly. To that, I say, this is not true. There is tools that you can use. And once you master these tools, learn how to use them effectively, you can create decent designs. You can actually improve the value of your visual pieces in terms of communication. So first, I'm going to talk about using color in visual communication. And the greatest tool in using color, if you think you have no idea how to put colors together, which colors work together, just get yourself, download an image of a color wheel from the internet, and this is the greatest tool ever. So let's just go over the vocabulary that I will be using in terms of introducing those color harmonies that come later. So hue is the color itself, like it's the yellow, orange, red, and so on and so forth. Tint is how much black, so this is this side of the wheel, how much black is added to the color. I'm sorry, tint is how much white, shade is how much black is added to the color, and then we have the temperature. So we have warm colors on this side and colder colors on this side. So when we look at this image of earring guys, carboxypeptidase, this is a monochromatic image, means except for this little ion here, which means it was created using just one color. And he uses just the shades and tints of blue to create this really, really mellow, really peaceful visualization of a very complex, actually, structure. So if you have things that relate together, a lot of elements, but you don't know, you want to actually highlight their relationship together, I think monochromatic images are very safe alternative to go to. Just use color, tints and shades of one color, and this is going to create something visually pleasing. The most common color harmonies historically is the complementary color, the way complementary harmony. So the way this harmony is created, you take one color from one side of the wheel and the second color from the other side of the wheel. And when you think of the traditional color harmonies that we know from our daily life, this harmony is very common. For example, green and red for Christmas, blue and orange for Hanukkah, green and purple for Halloween, and so on and so forth. So this harmony creates a very vibrant look. It's a very high contrast. And this harmony is very useful when you have two elements and you have smaller elements that needs to stand out. So the way to use this harmony, you use warmer color, the color that is more saturated. In here you see the yellow, and you use the less warmer color, colder color for the bigger element. And the energy of the warmer color balances out the scale. Of course, you can use this harmony also for elements that are equal in size, but I would recommend to use shades and tints to kind of tone down the color, because the colors, the saturated versions of the colors are very jarring on big elements, and it can be just too much. So the next harmony, very similar to the complementary, is the split complementary. So in this harmony, you highlight three elements and you highlight the relationship between two elements that is close. So you have basically elements that are closer in relationship together and farther. So for example, here in this example that I brought here, this is a painting of Irving Geis called Crambin. You see that he uses blue for the backbone, and then he uses yellow for the side chain, and then he uses orange for the sulfur bridge. But because sulfur bridges are parts of the side chains, this relationship between these colors highlights that the sulfur bridges are related to the side chains. And of course, you don't have to use just two. You can use more colors from one side if you have more element and create the highlight with the color from the opposite side. Now we're going into the more complicated color harmonies. This one is the triad. It's extremely vibrant and it creates very high contrast. My advice with this harmony is if you have one element that definitely has to stand out the most, I would use the brightest and most saturated color. And additional elements should be used with a little softer shades and tints. So for example, in this image, my goal was to highlight the nascent mRNA. So this is the brightest color in the composition. And I reserved the more toned down colors for the DNA and for the polymerase. Once we go into more complicated visualization, we're gonna have more colors. So the next color harmony is a tetradic. The way to create this harmony is to just draw a square on the color wheel and pick the colors that are on the corners of the square. So in this example that I have here, it's David's painting, Zika virus. You see that we have yellow and red, two warm colors, and we have blue and green that are a little colder colors. And red is the brightest color with the most energy, and it is reserved for the Zika virus. Zika virus is shown in red. It's the brightest color, the strongest, and this is the topic of the painting. The blood plasma is in the shades of yellow, sort of highlights the relationship between blood plasma and virus. And then you see the tension is created here. This is the cold color and colder color. And now when you think about the molecular story itself, in the molecular story, the tension is that the virus has to get through the cellular membrane to get into the cell. So in this painting, this kind of color tension gives you this like masterful translation into the tension in the actual molecular story. So that's one of my favorite David's paintings, actually. So of course, the tetradic, you don't have to use the square. You can use rectangle for more toned down combinations. So for example, here, I'm using red and brownish orange for the opioid receptor and the G protein. And I wanted to highlight the relationship that this enkephalin actually belongs with the receptor. This is the receptor that our body produces. This is the ligand that our body produces to go into this receptor. And then I wanted to add one stranger, which is the morphine. Morphine, it doesn't belong. So I actually used the color from the opposite side of the wheel. But I didn't want to add a fifth color that is from elsewhere of the wheel. I just used brighter blue for the morphine, and it's a little bit related with this color of the membrane. So it still stands out on its own, but it's not too jarring. There is not too many colors in this combination. And also I actually wanted the receptor, the opioid receptor, to be the focal point of this composition. So if I added like different color, that would take away the energy from the receptor. So that's why the receptor is in the brightest color. So my advice to you, think, what is the focal point of your illustration? Always actually think, what is the first thing the user should see? In my case, I wanted them to look at the opioid receptor, and that's the title of this illustration too. And the last color harmony that I wanted to introduce is analogous. This harmony invokes a very pleasing harmonious effect, and it stresses the relationships between the objects. So for example, if you have a protein that has multiple subunits, and you don't want to highlight any of them, but you want to show that those are different subunits, that's a very good harmony to go to. In this case here, I wanted to highlight that actually in the text description, it says that collagen is built of 3 helices. So I'm using analogous colors to highlight that relationships between the subunits of this protein. Of course, this can become very complex. Like in this illustration by Ernst Haeckel, he painted many fish. And also to highlight the relationship, he uses colors from one side of the wheels. And that gives you a very pleasing, very, very harmonious effect. So when designing with colors, there is certain considerations that you have to think about. First of all is accessibility. We have to remember that some people cannot see color. So when you communicate information with color, you have to always make sure that people can see that information. So for example, in this triangle, in this diagram, different modes of binding are shown with different colors. So this is actual information that is communicated just through the color. Now, when you go to Photoshop, you have the proof setups, and you can see how people with different types of color blindness see those colors. And you see that this information is completely lost. So one of the very, very important things, if it's like hardcore information that is communicated through color, always make sure everybody can see that. Go through those color blindness filter to make sure they are not lost. The next consideration is consistency. So if you have a story, if you communicate data points, or if you show, for example, different binding modes or same ligand bound to different proteins, the repeating element should always be consistent, because the users actually sort of internalize the legend, the color legend, looking at the first picture, and they sort of go along and expect to be the same. So don't kind of make them learn new legend with each piece, which each subsequent piece of visualization, if those elements are the same. And then my last advice, because we are illustrating proteins and there is no color at this level, we can actually pick any colors we want. And what we can do actually is highlight the relationship of the proteins that we illustrate with the organism. and sort of make our story sound louder, stronger. So for example, in this example on the left, in the molecule of the month, we see the luciferase. Luciferase is the protein that fireflies use to light up. And now when we look at the color choice, the navy blue, the purple-ish sort of gives you the association with the night, with the summer night. And this little highlight here kind of makes you think of the firefly. So it sort of makes the connection between the organism and the protein a little stronger, or the cell, or the whatever you want to highlight. In here you see hemoglobin. I chose red for hemoglobin because it's the protein that's in blood. And you see oxygen in blue to invoke the association with the air. So that is it about the color. Let's see, do I have time? Yeah, I have a little bit of time. So I can actually, let's go over graphic design, how to make your designs more effective. So you probably, even if you don't become graphic designer or a visual communicator, professional visual communicator of any sort like Illustrator, you still will have to use graphic design to create posters and presentations. So I wanted to introduce some of the tools that you can use to guide your users' attentions. So like I said, graphic design is used to manage the attention of the user. And one of the things that people confuse very often is they confuse graphic design with decoration. And this is how it works. I actually have an example here on the left. On the top and on the bottom, in both documents, there is the same amount of text. Now, in the top example, we have graphic design applied to the text. On the bottom, we just have decoration. We just have that border, and that's a decoration. In this case, the user can look at the text, at this information, and dissect right away the hierarchy of the information. What is the most important? What is an introduction? What is an aside? So in the way they will be able to understand the information better. And even before they start reading the information, their brain has the pattern of the hierarchy right away before even they start reading. In here, you see that there is a lump of text. You probably get bored halfway in, and you don't know what's important, what's not important, because the hierarchy was omitted completely. So now, how do we know how the users look at the text, how the users look at the information? So we have Gestalt Laws for that. Gestalt Laws is sort of the abbreviated results of the research in Gestalt psychology. So those were German researchers, very active in the beginning of the 20th century. And their main goal was to understand how the user processes the visual input. So there is millions and millions of stimuli in our daily life, yet when we look at them, we can make sense out of them. We can dissect the patterns in the reality and know what we look at. So here on the bottom, I'm just naming some of those laws: law of proximity, similarity, focal point, continuation, and so on and so forth. And now that we have design principles. So now that if we know how the user sees the reality, we can use design principles to sort of present the information in a way that it's going to be easy for the user to understand that information on the visual level. I'm not saying understanding the content, I'm just saying dissect the information on the visual level. So graphic design principles is pure heuristics. There is no science to it. People just collected certain rules that basically they looked what worked, and then they put that together in the rules. So this is science, this is just heuristics. So now let's have a look at some of those laws, of those Gestalt laws. So first off is the law of proximity. So we tend to perceive objects and elements that are in proximity to one another as a group. So in this image, you didn't think, oh, this is 4 puppies, right? You see 3 on the right. You see actually a group on the right and then 1 on the left. So it's sort of 2 groups, small one on the left, big one on the right. In the same way, actually so how do you apply this law? How do you take advantage of this, of the way we see the reality to communicate information? So on the simplest level, you can guide your users with space. So for example, here on the left, you look at the calcium pump stages, and you see that in here, you don't know how to actually read this sequence of images. Should you go top to bottom or left to right? Just adding a little bit more space in between the rows clues the users that they are supposed to go from left to right and then top to bottom. That's because this is the way we read the text in the Western cultures. So without even saying a word, you just clue the user what to do. Same way with communicating ideas. So your content on the level of content has some sort of hierarchy. There is something that you really, really want the user to know. There is the big ideas, there is the smaller ideas. Those ideas also can be communicated, taking advantage of the law of proximity. So first of all, you group the ideas. When we look at this layout, we see that in terms of hierarchy, this is the most important thing, this is the title. And without even knowing what this document is saying, we know that there are 2 ideas in this document. One is bigger, one is more important, and one is less important. And the users know right away, this is the bigger idea. I'm supposed to interact with that first. This one is the lesser idea. I might interact with it later. So next up is the law of similarity or invariance. So we tend to group elements that have some level of similarity and build relationship between elements that have similarity. So for example, in here we see a bunch of puppies, but as we keep looking at the image, we see that some of them are lighter, some of them are darker. So we created a pattern, lighter, darker. So taking advantage of this law in visual communication, we can create repeating elements to sort of structure the information and clue the user what belongs together. In here, we have those blue headlines, blue subheadings and red headlines. And we know that those are right away, those are subheading, and the information is structured, and we see the pattern that this is just the subheading of this information and so on and so forth. So the information is structured in a way that is very accessible for the user, and the user will know right away what to do with this information. And this creates a rhythm for the design and unifies us as a whole. So also, it's very important in graphic design to create repeating elements. So to highlight similar hierarchy with repeating elements to clue the users what type of information you are communicating. And you can, of course, create those repetitions through many different things like body text styles, subheading styles, color, emphasis, shapes, size of the white space. It's very important actually to keep the margins the same size, the spaces in between subheadings here. So this creates this feeling of harmony, and also users can see those patterns of similarity. Next off is the law of focal points. So whatever is distinctive, it's gonna catch the viewer's attention first. So in here we see brown puppies, and they are very cute, but our attention goes first to the white puppy because it's just one and it's different than the others. So how do we take advantage of that in visual communication? So we can use emphasis to emphasize things that we want users to see first. Images are the natural way to emphasize things. So for example, this paragraph is the first thing that we're gonna go to. Actually, our eyes naturally gonna go into the image first. And we also can emphasize segments of text using, for example, different styles, like here, underline. Notice that your eyes can notice these elements right away. Just those are the first things, almost maybe after the title, that your eye goes into in this layout. So my advice is to emphasize wisely. If you have small amount of emphasis, they will work as you intended. If you start emphasize every other thing, nothing will be emphasized. So like in a way, when a lot of people are screaming, nobody's actually heard. So there has to be this one definite scream that you would like to add to communicate very important points, points that you don't want your users to miss. And the last one that I want to talk about is the law of continuation. So our eyes follow lines and curves naturally, even if those lines are only suggested. So for example, in terms of looking at this image, we see the snake, we see the head, there is leaf in front, but we know that snake is not falling out into parts. It keeps going here behind the branch and so on and so forth. So we see, we just sort of follow this line, even though this line is not fully presented on the image. How do we take advantage of this principle in visual communication? So we can guide the user's attention using linear elements such as arrows, such as lines and things like that. But you have to remember that this kind of communication can be distracted through emphasis. So for example, in here, when we look at this chart, we're gonna go from here to here. We sort of start following those arrows the way the design suggests. But as soon as we highlight, emphasize some of the arrows, the users will first go from here to here and then look at these elements. So I've seen many times that people just use different size of arrows, and this is in their charts. This is one of the most confusing things, like you don't know how to access this information. So always think about the order of information. How would you like the information to be accessed by the viewer? In what order? What is the hierarchy of that information? So now my final advice when it comes to graphic design. In graphic design, less is always more. If you are in doubt about an element, should it be there, should it not, just get rid of it. Always get feedback, especially get feedback from people who would be representing your target audience, people who have the level of information you are targeting at. Also, never take negative feedback personally. Like in this Dilbert strip, you see that PowerPoint slides are not your children. People just give you feedback because this is how they feel. They have different level of information. They dissected the information differently than you intended. So you just might need to revisit the information to sort of cater to the needs of your users. And then another thing that I mentioned before, if you think about design, if you think how to communicate visually, this can make you better designer. If you use the Gestalt principles, graphic design principles, if you use the color harmonies, if you just think about the elements before you put them on the page, this can actually improve your visual communication greatly. So this is all what I have for you today. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Maria. This was wonderful. There's one question in the chat from Natalie about, do you have any thoughts about choosing fonts for text?
Yes. In general, so we have, I actually had slides that I got rid of it yesterday because I thought I'm not gonna have enough time. Let me see whether I can actually pull out this slide. So I'm gonna share screen again to show you the slides, so to illustrate what I'm talking about. So we have, in general, we have two types of fonts. We have sans, which are sans and serifs. So sans are very simple. Serifs have those little things here for at the end of the fonts. And there's also variety fonts like Comic Sans, novelty fonts, or like those script fonts. So for the science communication, those like script fonts, the novelty fonts, don't use them. They are just completely awful. So think about sans and sans serifs. Now, if we create a design piece like a poster or something, always be sure that you don't have more than two types of fonts in your design. So for example, here we have a sans serif font for the headline and for the subheading. And then we have a serif font for the body text. And this is it. You used up the amount of font faces you should use in your design. Because when you start using different font faces, it starts being messy and chaotic. Sans serif fonts are great for headings. Serif fonts are good for the body text, especially on the posters. If you have limited amount of space, they are easier to read because they ground the eyes, the serifs ground the eyes. If you want to use a sans serif font for the body text, be sure that the space in between lines is greater if you have the space, because with these fonts, it's harder for the eye to stay on the baselines. And of course, I would always advise to left align the text. And it's also very important to not to make the columns too wide for reading. So 50-75 characters is recommended for print, 95 for digital media. Otherwise, the eyes is gonna sort of slip off the baseline. Also important in science communication is legibility. So for example, in PDB IDs, we have the combination of the numbers and letters. Now, does the user know which one is uppercase I, lowercase l, or 1? So this is very important to think about. If the users cannot right away decide which letter that is, you have to change your font face. So, so that's all.
Super. I have a quick question for you, just personal interest. When you're designing a new picture or animation or stuff, how many revisions do you tend to go through? Or do you have it all worked out in your head before you start?
I have a general idea in my head. Sometimes this idea comes quicker on a good day, sometimes goes really slow, but I do a lot of revision, and I always make sure to revise it the day after. If it's if I liked it today, but tomorrow I look at it and I don't like it, I try to change it. And sort of, I don't get attached to my ideas too much. If I see after a few days, this definitely doesn't work, even though I was enthusiastic about it 3 days ago, or somebody tells me it doesn't work, I'm always happy to change it. I don't get attached to my ideas in a way that I take offense in people telling me this doesn't work. And I would advise you to do the same. You know, this is not, if somebody says it doesn't work, this is not an attack on your person. This is just doesn't work. This doesn't do the job that it's intended to do.
Nice.
I do have a question.
Yes.
This was a great talk. I totally loved it, especially the colors part. This is a quick question about how we could incorporate designing and such principles when we do a regular journal like articles. Like when you publish, how could you incorporate these design elements to cater to all sorts of audience and make them read your paper? Like how well could you use these elements?
Well, I think if you publish in the journal, you don't have control over the graphic design, right? Because this is the editors of the journals take over control, but you have control over your figures, right? So people when people look at the scientific abstract and at the scientific papers, when people look for papers, they first read the abstract and look at the figures. So number one, make sure your figures are very telling, that the figures sort of give the user the gist of what you present in your article. I think if your figures are good, there's going to be greater uptake with your article. Make sure that these figures are clean, that there is emphasis, but not too much emphasis. Make sure that the users know how to read the information in the figures, and make them meaningful, because this will be the information that's probably the one that this is the foot that goes forward, the figures and the abstract.
Thank you
Great.
so much. That was great again.
We have
Thank
two related questions from Tanvi and Natalie here. They're asking, how much do you rely on planning in your designs versus letting the process guide you as you build it? And do you sketch by hand when you're planning?
Let me see that question, because it was a very long one. I am not a very good planner. I sort of come up with things as I go. And also when I get feedback, I'm happy to change it. So planning is like rigid, I feel. So you sort of have to stay flexible. I am actually, sometimes I draw by hand, especially when I design logos and things like that, to sketch the general idea, but I'm not that good at drawing and sketching. So I will just draw like general idea, but nothing detailed, because I'm not good at it. Same with, when you create animation, you're supposed to do those storyboards where you show each frame, you draw each frame. I absolutely have no idea how to do it. Like I tried, I don't know how to draw well enough to sort of go through a storyboard and create it. So I create them digitally. Does this answer the question?
Great. Yes, we got to thank you.
Well, thank you again, Maria. Great presentation. And as always, I learned something.
Great, thank you.
It's one of the interesting things in life is, as you dig into any topic, you realize how sophisticated it is and how much thought has gone into that particular subject area over the years. And you exemplified that beautifully today, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much.